Treyson Long was 39, quiet, and worked night shifts repairing hospital equipment in Columbus, Ohio. Most people believed Madeline Carter Long had outgrown him years ago. He drove an old gray Ford Escape, drank burnt Speedway coffee at 2 a.m., and still used the same faded navy jacket every winter. What nobody knew was that Treyson had just given bone marrow to save Madeline's younger brother from leukemia. 3 days after the transplant, while Noah Carter was still isolated inside Riverside Methodist Hospital, Treyson walked into his kitchen, saw half the closet emptied, and felt his phone vibrate. "I moved out. Don't make this harder than it already is." His hand tightened slowly against the counter. The fresh IV bruise on his arm was still bleeding through the bandage. If you're listening from somewhere outside the U.S., comment your country and local time below. And if you enjoy stories where quiet people let the truth speak for them, subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow's story goes even deeper. Riverside Methodist Hospital never really slept. At 2 in the morning, the emergency elevator still opened every few minutes. Ventilator alarms still echoed down ICU hallways. Coffee machines still hissed beside exhausted nurses leaning against counters under fluorescent lights. Treyson Long knew every sound in that building. For nearly 11 years, he had worked behind the walls. Most patients never noticed. He repaired infusion pumps, MRI systems, heart monitors, surgical imaging equipment. Machines people only paid attention to when they stopped working. Most of the hospital staff liked him because he never made noise. If an operating room lost imaging 15 minutes before surgery, Treyson showed up quietly with a toolbox and fixed it. If an ICU monitor failed during a storm, Treyson stayed until sunrise without complaining once. At Riverside, dependable mattered more than charming. But outside the hospital, people saw him differently, especially around Madeline Carter Long. Madeline was polished in ways Treyson never tried to be. She worked for Ashcroft Urban Realty in downtown Columbus and knew exactly how to carry herself at charity dinners, networking events, rooftop parties, and corporate mixers. She dressed like somebody who expected to be noticed. Treyson dressed like somebody trying not to inconvenience anyone. The difference bothered her more each year. The first few years of marriage had been easier. Back then, they rented a small apartment near Grandview Heights and ate takeout Chinese food on the floor because they couldn't afford furniture yet. Madeline laughed more then. Treyson talked more too. But careers changed people. Madeline started moving upward at Ashcroft. Better clients, better commissions, better circles, and eventually, better comparisons. At parties, Treyson noticed the pause people gave after hearing what he did for work. "Oh," they would say, politely. Not doctor, not executive, not investor, just the guy who repaired hospital machines. Madeline always smiled too quickly after those conversations, like she wanted to move on before embarrassment settled in. Treyson noticed it. He just never reacted to it. That was his habit. Observe first, speak later, sometimes never. The winter Noah Carter got diagnosed. Columbus was buried under freezing rain. Ice coated the sidewalks around Riverside Methodist. Ambulances arrived with slush packed into their tires. Noah was 33, athletic, loud, the kind of man who still played rec basketball twice a week. Then bruises started appearing on his arms. Then nosebleeds. Then exhaustion. Within 12 days, he was sitting inside an oncology consultation room while Dr. Benjamin Mercer explained acute myeloid leukemia in a calm voice nobody in that room would ever forget. Elaine Carter cried immediately. Madeline stared at the wall. Noah asked practical questions first. How bad? How long? What are my chances? Treyson sat quietly beside the window, listening to every word. Chemotherapy started within days. Then came the search for a donor. Family testing. Registries. Phone calls. Paperwork. Madeline spiraled under pressure faster than Treyson expected. She forgot appointments, lost insurance forms, snapped at nurses trying to help. So Treyson handled things. Quietly. He organized Noah's medication schedule into labeled folders. He called Blue Cross 3 separate times over billing disputes. He drove Noah to appointments when chemotherapy left him too weak to hold the steering wheel steady. At work, Treyson swapped shifts without complaint. Night shift, weekend shift, double shift. Nobody at Riverside heard him ask for sympathy. One night in February, Treyson sat alone in the transplant wing cafeteria, staring at a turkey sandwich in plastic wrap while snow hit the hospital window sideways. His phone buzzed. Madeline. Mom's freaking out again. He called immediately. Elaine was crying because another donor candidate failed compatibility testing. Noah's numbers were getting worse. Time mattered now. After the call ended, Treyson sat there another minute before rubbing both hands over his face. Then he stood up and walked toward the lab department. The next morning, he submitted his own sample. He never mentioned it at dinner, never announced it dramatically. He just did it. 3 weeks later, Treyson was replacing a faulty monitor in pediatric ICU when his phone rang again. Dr. Mercer. Mr. Long, the doctor said carefully. We found a very strong match. Treyson leaned against the equipment cart. For a second, he thought maybe the registry had finally found someone. Then Mercer continued. It's you. The hallway suddenly felt smaller. Machines beeped around him. A nurse hurried past, carrying medications. Treyson stared through the ICU glass into a room where a child slept under warm blankets. You're certain, he asked. 93% compatibility. That number was unusually high. Rarely happened outside siblings. Treyson closed his eyes briefly. When do we start? There was no hesitation in his voice. That night, Madeline cried harder than she had since Noah's diagnosis. Not because Treyson volunteered, because she had expected him to. He noticed that too. She sat curled on the couch in their living room while Netflix played untouched on the television. She whispered, I don't know what we'd do without you right now. The sentence sounded strange to Treyson. Not loving, useful, like a tool somebody suddenly realized they needed. Still, he sat beside her and rested a hand lightly against her shoulder. It's gonna work, he said. Madeline nodded but avoided eye contact. Over the next several weeks, Treyson's schedule became brutal. Hospital shifts, compatibility testing, physical exams, blood draws, bone density scans, consent meetings. Meanwhile, Noah's condition worsened. His skin turned pale gray from chemotherapy. He lost nearly 20 pounds. One afternoon, Treyson found him staring out a hospital window toward the parking garage. You look worse than me, Noah joked weakly. Treyson smirked slightly. Hospital coffee's killing me. Noah laughed once, then winced from the effort. Silence settled for a moment. Then Noah looked at him carefully. You really doing this? Treyson shrugged. Yeah. You don't have to. I know. Noah swallowed hard. Most people in the Carter family talked loudly when emotions hit them. Treyson had noticed that for years. Noah was different when things got serious. Quieter. More honest. "I won't forget this," Noah said. Treyson looked down at the hospital bracelet around his wrist from another round of testing. Just get healthy. That evening, Treyson returned home after a 14-hour day. The house was dark except for the kitchen light. Madeline stood at the counter, typing quickly on her phone. When Treyson walked in, she flipped the screen over immediately. Too quickly. He noticed that too. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah. Work stuff." She smiled, but only with her mouth, not her eyes. Treyson set his keys down slowly. For the first time in months, something cold moved quietly through his chest. Not anger. Instinct. Then Madeline stepped forward and kissed his cheek like nothing had happened. And Treyson said nothing at all. The transplant coordination office sat on the 4th floor of Riverside Methodist Hospital, directly above the oncology wing. Everything there smelled sterile. Coffee, printer toner, disinfectant wipes, recycled air. Treyson Long sat alone beneath fluorescent lights while a transplant coordinator flipped through a thick stack of paperwork inside a blue folder labeled Donor Consent. Outside the office window, sleet tapped softly against the glass. Inside somebody's life was being measured in signatures. "Some discomfort is expected after the procedure," the coordinator said gently. "Fatigue can last several weeks. There's also risk of nerve irritation, infection, and anesthesia complications." Treyson nodded once. "Understood." She paused. "You can still decline." He looked at the folder, then at the date beside Noah Carter's scheduled transplant window. Noah's white blood cell counts had crashed again 2 nights earlier. Dr. Mercer had adjusted treatment immediately, but everyone understood what that meant. The clock was shrinking. Treyson picked up the pen. "I'm good." The coordinator slid another page toward him. He signed quietly. No dramatic speech, no hesitation, just ink moving across paper. Hours later, Treyson walked through the oncology hallway carrying a plastic hospital bag full of informational packets and medication instructions. Nurses moved quickly around him. Monitors beeped behind partially closed doors. He stopped outside Noah's room. Noah was asleep beneath warmed blankets, Evelyn's running into both arms. The television played muted ESPN highlights. Nobody was watching. Elaine Carter sat in the corner chair, scrolling Facebook. The second she looked up, her expression changed into performative gratitude. "There he is," she said loudly. "Our hero." Treyson hated that tone immediately. Not because it sounded appreciative, because it sounded temporary. Elaine stood and hugged him quickly without waiting for permission. "We're so grateful," she said. "You have no idea." Treyson nodded awkwardly. Noah stirred awake slowly. His face looked thinner every day. "Hey," Noah muttered. "Hey." Elaine immediately started talking again. "Madeline posted the update already. People are sending prayers from everywhere." She turned her phone screen outward proudly. A Facebook post glowed across the display. "Family means everything. We finally found a donor for Noah. We're beyond grateful for everyone supporting us through this journey." Below the caption sat a black and white hospital photo of Noah. Hundreds of reactions. Dozens of comments. Praying hands emojis. Heart emojis. Treyson noticed something immediately. His name wasn't there. Not directly. Just donor. Useful. Anonymous. Elaine kept scrolling. People have been so kind, she said. Pastor Reynolds even shared it. Treyson looked toward Noah instead. You eat today? Half a burger. Noah answered weakly. Better than yesterday. Noah gave a faint smile. Elaine returned to her phone before another silence could settle. 20 minutes later, Madeline finally arrived. Designer coat, fresh makeup, expensive perfume that cut sharply through the hospital smell. She kissed Noah's forehead first, then Treyson's cheek. You signed everything, yeah? Good. The word landed strangely. Not relieved. Efficient. Like another task had been completed correctly. Madeline sat beside Noah and immediately started discussing fundraiser ideas with Elaine. Benefit dinner, online campaign, corporate sponsorship outreach. Treyson stood quietly near the window listening. Nobody asked how the testing process felt. Nobody asked whether he was nervous. Nobody asked if he had eaten since morning. At one point, Elaine glanced toward him casually. Well, she said at least something good came out of this marriage. The room went still for half a second. Madeline didn't correct her. Noah looked uncomfortable immediately. Mom, he muttered. Elaine waved him off. Oh, please. I'm complimenting him. Treyson looked down at the hospital bracelet still around his wrist, then back toward the hallway. It's fine. But it wasn't. And somewhere deep down, he knew that. That night, Treyson drove home through freezing rain while windshield wipers dragged rhythmically across the glass. Traffic crawled near downtown Columbus because of an overturned semi on Interstate 70. Madeline spent the drive answering emails, or pretending to. Her phone remained angled away from him the entire time. At a red light near Bexley, the screen lit briefly in the darkness. Derek H. Only a second, but Treyson saw it. Madeline turned the phone face down immediately. Work? Treyson asked calmly. Yeah. What kind marketing stuff? Another short answer. Another closed door. Treyson nodded once and kept driving. The thing about Treyson Long was this silence never meant blindness. People mistook quiet men for unaware men all the time. At Riverside, Treyson had spent over a decade diagnosing problems most people missed. A machine rarely failed all at once. First came small irregularities, tiny timing issues, strange noises, brief flickers across monitors. Patterns mattered. And lately, Madeline had become a pattern. 3 nights later, Treyson arrived home after a 16-hour shift repairing a failed imaging system in surgical radiology. The house was dark except for light beneath the office door. Madeline sat inside talking softly. The second Treyson stepped into the hallway, her voice stopped. A beat later, the door opened. You're home early? It was nearly midnight. That's early now. Madeline forced a small laugh. I just mean before 1. She moved past him quickly toward the kitchen. Treyson noticed she carried her phone face inward against her chest. Again, another pattern. He said nothing. Instead, he showered, changed clothes, and sat at the kitchen counter eating leftover pasta straight from a container while Madeline scrolled silently beside him. Finally, she spoke. You know, Ashcroft's regional director came into town this week. Treyson kept eating. No. Derek Halpern. There it was again. This time with a full name. He's considering me for a senior strategy position. That good? It's huge. Treyson nodded slowly. You want it, obviously. Her tone sharpened slightly, then softened again. It'd mean more travel. How much depends. The conversation died there. Madeline returned to her phone. Treyson returned to his food. but a few minutes later, her screen reflected faintly in the dark kitchen window. Long enough for Treyson to see a message appear. Can't stop thinking about last night. The sender disappeared before he could read more. Madeline locked the phone instantly. Treyson lowered his fork carefully. His face never changed. "Everything okay?" Madeline asked quickly. "Yeah." "You seem tired." "I am." That part was true. His body already hurt from donor preparation injections that stimulated marrow production. Deep aches spread through his lower back and hips every morning now. But the heaviness settling into his chest had nothing to do with medicine. Madeline eventually went upstairs. Treyson stayed in the kitchen alone. The refrigerator hummed softly. Rain ticked against the windows. After several minutes, he reached into his jacket pocket and removed the donor schedule packet. Procedure date, recovery instructions, emergency contacts. Every page centered around sacrifice. He stared at the paperwork quietly. Then he folded it once and placed it back into the envelope. Upstairs, he heard Madeline laughing softly through the bedroom door. Not at him, at somebody else. And for the first time since Noah's diagnosis, Treyson Long stopped feeling like a husband inside his own house. The morning of the bone marrow harvest began at 4:12 a.m. Columbus was still dark when Treyson Long pulled into the employee parking structure at Riverside Methodist Hospital. Thin fog drifted across the concrete levels. Sodium lights reflected weakly off wet pavement from overnight rain. He sat inside the Ford Escape for a moment after turning the engine off. The hospital rose ahead of him in silent gray blocks of glass and steel. For over a decade, Treyson had walked into that building as an employee. That morning, he entered as a patient. The difference felt strange. His lower back already ached from 5 days of donor preparation injections. The medication forced the body to overproduce marrow cells before extraction. Dr. Mercer warned him it would feel like deep pressure inside the bones. The doctor had been right. It felt like someone had driven steel rods through both hips. Still, Treyson grabbed his overnight bag and walked inside without complaint. The transplant floor was quieter than usual before sunrise. Nurses spoke softly behind stations lit by computer monitors. Coffee brewed somewhere nearby. A volunteer at the front desk smiled warmly. "Good morning, Mr. Long." Treyson nodded. "Morning." People at Riverside knew what he was doing. Word traveled fast in hospitals. Not because Treyson told anyone, because nurses respected sacrifice. A surgical tech passing down the hallway stopped briefly. "You're doing a hell of a thing," he said quietly. Treyson looked uncomfortable immediately. "It's family." The tech nodded once. Still, then he kept walking. Madeline arrived 23 minutes late. Treyson noticed because he had already finished intake paperwork, blood pressure screening, and pre-anesthesia prep by the time she entered the room carrying a Starbucks cup and her phone. "Traffic was horrible," she said quickly. It was 5 in the morning. Treyson didn't challenge it. Madeline kissed his forehead lightly before sitting beside the bed. She wore expensive boots and a cream-colored coat that looked too clean for a hospital floor. Her attention kept drifting toward her phone. Buzz! Check screen, lock screen, repeat. Treyson watched silently while a nurse attached another IV line into his arm. "You nervous?" Madeline asked finally. "A little. You'll be okay." The sentence sounded rehearsed, like something expected, not something felt. Dr. Benjamin Mercer entered shortly afterward carrying a tablet under one arm. He reviewed the procedure calmly. General anesthesia, aspiration needles, posterior pelvic extraction, recovery monitoring. Possible soreness for several weeks. Madeline nodded through the explanation without asking a single question. Treyson noticed that too. Before Mercer left, he rested a hand briefly against Treyson's bed rail. Noah's counts stabilized overnight, the doctor said. This gives him a real chance. Real chance. Not guarantee. Everyone understood that part. Once the room emptied again, silence settled heavily between Treyson and Madeline. Rain tapped faintly against the windows. Somewhere down the hallway, wheels rattled across tile floors. Treyson looked toward his wife. You sleep at all a little. You should go home after surgery. Madeline crossed one leg over the other. I have a conference call later. Treyson stared at her quietly. Today, of all days. And still work came first. Or maybe something else did. But again, he said nothing. At 6:08 a.m. nurses wheeled Treyson toward the surgical suite. The ceiling lights slid overhead one rectangle at a time. He had walked these hallways hundreds of times before repairing equipment. Now he noticed details patients probably always noticed. How cold operating corridors felt. How bright the lights were. How people avoided eye contact right before procedures. Outside the OR doors, Madeline touched his hand briefly. I'll be here when you wake up. Treyson nodded once. Then the doors swung shut between them. Inside operating room 6, everything smelled sharply sterile. Blue drapes, steel trays, masked faces. An anesthesiologist adjusted medication lines while another nurse confirmed Treyson's identity and procedure details. You comfortable? Someone asked. Close enough. A few staff members recognized him immediately. One nurse smiled behind her mask. You fixed our imaging system last Christmas. Treyson managed a faint smirk. Try not to break it again. A few people laughed softly. Then, anesthesia entered the IV. The ceiling blurred slowly. Voices faded. Darkness closed in. When Treyson woke again, pain hit first. Deep, heavy, like someone had scooped fire directly into his hips. He inhaled sharply. The recovery room lights looked dim and distant. A monitor beeped steadily near his head. A nurse noticed movement immediately. Easy, she said gently. Procedure went well. Treyson swallowed hard. His mouth felt dry as paper. Noah stable. Relief moved through him before anything else. Not fear, not pain. Relief. The nurse adjusted blankets around him. You'll be sore for a while. That bad? She gave him an honest look. Pretty bad. Hours passed in fragments after that. Pain medication. Vitals. Short periods of sleep. At one point, Treyson woke enough to notice Madeline sitting near the window, scrolling through emails. Or pretending to. You okay? He asked weakly. Madeline looked up quickly. Yeah? How's Noah? They started prep for the transplant. Good. Madeline stood and walked over. For a second, Treyson thought she might actually stay close. Instead, she checked the time on her watch. I can only stay another hour, she said. Derek's flying in from Chicago for meetings. There it was. Again. Derek. Always casually inserted. Always nearby somehow. Treyson looked toward the ceiling. Okay. Madeline frowned slightly. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. You've been weird lately. Weird? The word almost made him laugh. Instead, Treyson shifted carefully against the bed and immediately winced from pain shooting through his lower spine. Madeline barely noticed. "I'm under pressure too, Trey." Pressure. He had Marrow removed from his body 4 hours earlier, but somehow she sounded like the burdened one. The silence between them thickened. Finally, Madeline leaned down and kissed his forehead again. "I'll check on you later." Then she left. Treyson watched the door close slowly behind her. By evening, Noah's transplant process officially began. Dr. Mercer stopped by Treyson's recovery room personally. The cells looked strong, he said. "Very strong." Treyson nodded tiredly. "Good. You should be proud of this." Proud wasn't the word Treyson would have chosen. Necessary felt closer. Late that night, after most visitors had gone home, Treyson sat partially upright in bed, trying to drink hospital broth that tasted mostly like salt water. Pain spread through his hips every time he moved. Outside his room, snow began falling softly against the dark hospital windows. His phone battery had nearly died. Madeline hadn't come back. Around 11:40 p.m., Treyson reached toward the bedside table for the iPad Madeline had left behind earlier. Probably accidentally. The screen lit immediately when he touched it. A message notification appeared before he could stop himself from seeing it. "Derek Halpern. Last night was amazing. Wish I was there instead of him." Treyson froze. The room suddenly felt silent in a completely different way. Not peaceful. Empty. Below the message sat an older thread preview. "Can't wait until this whole thing is over." Treyson stared at the screen without blinking. Then another message arrived. "You deserve better than a guy who fixes machines for a living." The monitor beside Treyson continued its steady electronic beeping. Outside, snow kept falling across Columbus. Inside room 417, Treyson slowly lowered the iPad back onto the table beside his untouched broth. And for the first time since marrying Madeline Carter, something inside him finally stopped trying to explain her behavior away. Treyson Long did not confront Madeline the next morning. He did not throw the iPad. He did not storm into Noah's hospital room demanding explanations. And he definitely did not call Derek Halpern. Instead, he asked the nurse for another cup of water, swallowed 2 pain pills, and quietly memorized everything he had seen. Years working around medical systems had trained him to trust patterns over emotion. Machines lied less than people. A failing monitor always left evidence somewhere. So did failing marriages. The transplant wing remained under strict isolation protocols after Noah's procedure. Visitors sanitized constantly. Nurses wore masks and gloves entering rooms. Every surface smelled faintly of bleach and alcohol wipes. Noah's immune system was nearly non-existent now. The marrow needed time. Time to attach. Time to rebuild blood production. Time to determine whether Treyson's pain had actually saved him. Dr. Mercer considered the first 48 hours encouraging. Noah's fever remained stable. Blood pressure held steady. No immediate rejection signs. Too early to celebrate, Mercer warned carefully. Still, the tone in the doctor's voice carried cautious optimism. Treyson listened from his own recovery room while shifting painfully against stiff hospital sheets. Every movement still hurt. The extraction sites near his hips felt bruised deep into the bone. Standing too quickly sent lightning pain through his lower back. But Treyson never mentioned it unless directly asked. By the 3rd day after surgery, the hospital discharged him with restrictions. No lifting, limited movement, mandatory follow-up appointments. The nurse wheeled him downstairs, despite Treyson insisting he could walk. Hospital policy. Outside, cold March rain covered Columbus in gray mist. Madeline arrived 20 minutes late to pick him up. Again. She blamed downtown traffic. Again. Treyson simply nodded and climbed carefully into the passenger seat of her Audi SUV. The drive home stayed quiet. Madeline kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other near her phone resting beside the console. Buzz. Screen glance. Lock. Repeat. Treyson watched rain slide across the windshield. "You should rest when we get home," Madeline said eventually. "Planning to. You still look pale." "Probably because someone drilled into my spine." The comment came out drier than intended. Madeline gave a short laugh that disappeared quickly. "You know what I mean." Treyson looked out the window toward rows of wet storefronts passing through Upper Arlington. He knew exactly what she meant. She was uncomfortable, not guilty, not emotional, inconvenienced. That realization settled heavier inside him than the physical pain. When they reached the house, Madeline carried nothing inside except her purse and phone. Treyson lifted his own overnight bag slowly, despite the pain. Not because he had to, because he noticed she never offered. Small things mattered when people stopped pretending. Inside the kitchen, Treyson lowered himself carefully into a chair, while Madeline moved through the house answering emails aloud to herself. Or performing busyness. He couldn't tell anymore. At one point, she disappeared upstairs for nearly 40 minutes. Treyson sat alone at the kitchen table, sipping cold water and staring at the rain outside. Then he noticed something simple. Madeline's iPad still sat inside her tote bag near the counter. The same iPad, the same message thread. Treyson looked at it for several long seconds, then looked away, then back again. Quiet people reached limits too. Slowly, carefully, he stood and walked toward the bag. The pain in his hips sharpened immediately. He ignored it. The iPad unlocked with the same passcode Madeline had used for years. His birthday. That detail almost made him laugh. The message thread with Derek remained open. Treyson read silently. Hotel reservations, private jokes. Photos from restaurants Treyson had supposedly been too busy to attend. The affair stretched back nearly 7 months, long before Noah got sick, long before donor testing, long before surgery. One message froze Treyson completely. Derek. When are you finally leaving him? Madeline. After Noah stabilizes. I can't deal with both disasters at once. Disasters. Plural. Treyson lowered himself slowly back into the kitchen chair. His body suddenly felt heavier than exhaustion alone could explain. For several minutes, he simply sat there, listening to the refrigerator hum. No yelling upstairs. No dramatic confrontation, just silence. Then instinct returned. Steady, controlled. Treyson opened the message settings and photographed key conversations with his own phone. Not every message, only the important ones. Dates, hotel confirmations, statements proving timelines. Then he emailed the photos quietly to a private backup account he used for hospital certification records. Years repairing medical systems had taught him another important lesson. Data disappeared when people panicked. Backups mattered. Afterward, Treyson returned the iPad exactly where he found it. By evening, Madeline acted completely normal. She ordered Thai food, asked whether his pain medication was helping, watched half a Netflix episode beside him on the couch while texting constantly beneath a blanket. At 9:14 p.m., her phone buzzed again. Madeline stood immediately. Work call. She stepped outside onto the back patio despite freezing drizzle. Through the glass door, Treyson watched her expression change. softer, warmer, more alive than she had looked with him in months, maybe years. He turned away before she came back inside. The next morning, Treyson drove himself to a follow-up appointment at Riverside. Technically, he should not have been driving yet. But Madeline claimed she had another corporate meeting, so Treyson drove alone. His hands tightened against the steering wheel every time pain shot through his hips over potholes. The hospital parking garage looked exactly the same as always. Employees rushing, ambulance sirens echoing faintly nearby. Life continuing. Inside the transplant clinic, nurses checked his vitals, while Treyson answered questions calmly. Pain level manageable. Dizziness. Some. Bleeding minimal. One nurse studying his chart frowned slightly. You shouldn't be alone today. Treyson gave a faint shrug. My wife's busy. The nurse hesitated like she wanted to say more. Instead, she simply adjusted his bandage carefully. While waiting for discharge paperwork, Treyson walked slowly toward Noah's isolation room. Noah looked terrible, paler than before, weak enough that lifting a water cup required effort. But when he saw Treyson, genuine relief crossed his face. There you are. Treyson smirked faintly. Still ugly? Barely conscious, but still better looking than you. That earned a weak laugh from both of them. Noah noticed Treyson lowering himself carefully into the chair beside the bed. You hurting? Bad little sore. Bullshit. Treyson looked toward the heart monitor blinking steadily beside Noah's bed. You alive? Looks like it. Silence settled comfortably for a minute. Then Noah frowned slightly. Madeline hasn't really been around much. Treyson kept his face neutral. She's stressed. Yeah. But Noah didn't sound convinced. Neither was Treyson anymore. As he left the hospital later that afternoon, rain clouds finally broke apart over Columbus. Weak sunlight spilled across wet sidewalks outside Riverside Methodist. Treyson walked slowly toward the parking garage with one hand pressed subtly against his lower back. That was when his phone buzzed. A motion notification. Front door camera activity detected. Treyson stopped walking. Opened the app. The timestamp showed 12 minutes earlier. The video loaded grainily. A black BMW pulled into Treyson's driveway. Derek Halpern stepped out first. Madeline opened the front door before he even reached it. Then Derek walked inside Treyson Long's house carrying an overnight bag. The timestamp read 2:11 p.m., middle of the afternoon, while Noah Carter recovered in isolation. While Treyson still had fresh surgical bruises across his hips from donating marrow. The video ended with the front door closing softly behind them. Treyson stared at the screen without blinking. Then he quietly saved a copy of the footage. Treyson Long did not drive home immediately after seeing the security footage. He sat inside the parking garage at Riverside Methodist Hospital with the engine off and the video paused on his phone screen. Derek Halpern's hand rested casually against Treyson's front door as he stepped inside carrying the overnight bag. Like he belonged there, like Treyson had already disappeared. Outside the windshield, nurses crossed the garage entrance wrapped in winter jackets, while helicopters thudded faintly overhead toward the trauma center. Life continued normally around him. That almost made it worse. Treyson replayed the footage once, then once more, not because he doubted what he saw, because calm mattered. Emotion blurred details. Details mattered now. At 4:47 p.m., Treyson finally started the Ford Escape and drove home through downtown Columbus traffic. His lower back screamed every time he pressed the brake pedal. The donor recovery pain had deepened over the past 2 days instead of improving. Dr. Mercer warned him that happened sometimes. Bone marrow regeneration exhausted the body in strange ways. But Treyson barely noticed the physical pain anymore. The house sat quiet when he pulled into the driveway. No BMW, no Derek. Only cold wind pushing dead leaves across the lawn. Treyson walked slowly toward the front door, one careful step at a time. Inside the house smelled faintly of Madeline's perfume and takeout food. Nothing looked wrong immediately, which somehow felt more disturbing. He set his keys down and listened. Silence upstairs, silence in the kitchen, silence everywhere. Then Treyson noticed the hallway closet door standing partially open. Inside, several empty hangers swung gently from the rod. He froze. Slowly, he climbed the stairs. Pain spread sharply through both hips, halfway up, forcing him to grip the railing. The bedroom door stood open. Half the closet was empty. Madeline's shoes were gone. Jewelry trays missing. 3 dresser drawers completely cleared out. Only impressions remained in the carpet where luggage had rested. The framed wedding photo near the bedside lamp had been turned face down. Treyson stared at it for several long seconds. Then he noticed the envelope. White. Folded once. Placed directly in the center of the bed. His name written across the front. Trey. Not Treyson. Not husband. Not even a full name. Just something abbreviated and easier to leave behind. He opened it carefully. The handwriting looked rushed. I can't do this anymore. I deserve happiness too. And honestly, I've felt alone for years. You live like a ghost, Trey. You care more about machines and hospitals than real life. Please don't make this uglier than it needs to be. Madeline. No apology. No mention of Noah. No mention of the marrow donation still healing inside Treyson's body. Just escape. Treyson lowered the note slowly. Outside wind rattled weakly against the bedroom window. The house suddenly felt unfamiliar, like a staged version of his own life. Most people expected explosions after betrayal. Yelling, broken dishes, drunken phone calls. But Treyson Long had spent too many years repairing systems under pressure. Panic created more damage than the original failure. So instead of reacting, Treyson reached into his pocket and took out his phone. Then he started documenting everything. Wide photos of the bedroom, the empty drawers, the closet, the note on the bed. Time-stamped images. Methodical. Controlled. Next came the office downstairs. Treyson opened the filing cabinet containing tax records and banking paperwork. One drawer sat slightly crooked. Recently opened. Inside, several folders were missing. Joint investment statements. Retirement account summaries. Property documents. Treyson sat carefully in the office chair, opened his laptop, and logged into their joint banking accounts. Then he stopped moving entirely. Multiple transfers, weeks old, small enough individually to avoid attention, large enough together to matter. 6,000, 4,000, 8,000. Again and again. A total of nearly $82,000 moved into a separate account Treyson didn't recognize. The earliest transfer dated back almost 2 months, before surgery, before the Marrow procedure, before Noah's transplant. Madeline had already been preparing her exit while Treyson underwent donor testing. Treyson leaned back slowly and closed his eyes. Not because he was emotional, because the timeline mattered. The overlap mattered. Every detail mattered now. His phone buzzed suddenly against the desk. Madeline. Treyson stared at the screen for a moment before answering. What? Her voice sounded irritated immediately. You got home. Yeah. Silence. Then I left a note. I saw it. Another pause. Treyson could hear restaurant noise faintly behind her voice. Glasses clinking, people talking. Not grief, not tension. Dinner. You're taking this very calmly, Madeline said carefully. Treyson looked around the office quietly. What reaction were you expecting? You know what I mean? He actually did. She expected chaos. Something emotional enough to use later. Instead, Treyson simply asked, "Where are you staying with a friend?" Lie. The security footage already answered that question. Still, Treyson let the lie sit there untouched. You moved money, he said calmly. Madeline hesitated half a second too long. I used my savings. Joint account. I contributed too. Another interesting phrase. Not our money, not marriage. Contribution. Transaction language. Treyson opened the banking statements again. You started transferring money before Noah's surgery. Madeline's tone sharpened immediately. Are you seriously doing this right now? Treyson stared at the time-stamped transactions. Yes, right now. Because truth had timing. But again, he kept emotion out of his voice. When were you planning to tell me I didn't owe you a warning? There it was. Cold. Direct. Almost relieved. Treyson rubbed one hand slowly across his forehead. The movement pulled painfully through his lower back. Madeline continued before he could respond. You checked out of this marriage years ago, Trey. No. I worked. You disappeared into work. I paid our bills. You hid in hospitals. The irony almost stunned him. She said it while Noah remained alive because Treyson spent months inside those hospitals helping save him. Still, Treyson said nothing. Madeline exhaled sharply. I'm not doing this over the phone. Okay. Another pause. Then she added quietly, please don't involve Noah. That sentence finally made Treyson's jaw tighten. Not because she protected Noah, because she knew. Somewhere underneath all her excuses, Madeline Carter understood exactly how ugly her timing looked. The call ended seconds later. Treyson placed the phone down carefully. Then he sat alone in the office while darkness slowly filled the house. Hours passed quietly after that. He printed banking records, exported account statements, downloaded camera footage backups, saved transaction histories onto an encrypted external drive he normally used for hospital system diagnostics. Outside rain started again after midnight. Inside the empty house, Treyson finally stood and walked upstairs toward the bedroom. Half the closet remained empty. The face-down wedding photo still sat beside the lamp. This time, Treyson picked it up. The picture showed them on a Lake Erie shoreline 8 years earlier. Madeline smiling brightly. Treyson awkward in a rented suit. Back then, he truly believed she loved him. Maybe she had. Maybe people changed slowly enough not to notice until damage became permanent. Treyson set the frame inside a drawer and closed it. Then he lay carefully onto one side of the mattress to avoid pressure on his hips. The pain medication had worn off hours ago. Every nerve in his lower back burned. But exhaustion finally dragged him toward sleep anyway. At 2:13 a.m., his phone vibrated again. A new notification from the joint bank account. Large transfer pending, $20,000. Destination account, Halpern Consulting Group. Treyson stared at the screen in the darkness. Then very slowly he opened the banking app and took another screenshot. By the second week after Madeline moved out, the story had already changed. Not the truth, the public version. And public versions spread faster, especially online, especially when the person controlling the narrative understood image better than honesty. Treyson Long first noticed it during a lunch break inside the Riverside Methodist Biomedical Workshop. He sat alone at a metal table, eating microwave soup, while reviewing maintenance logs for ICU telemetry systems. Across the room, two younger technicians lowered their voices when they realized he had entered. One of them glanced toward him awkwardly, then quickly away. Treyson kept eating. A few minutes later, his phone buzzed. A text from an old neighbor. "Hey man, heard things got rough. Hope you're okay." No details, which meant rumors were already moving. That night, Treyson finally opened Facebook for the first time in days. Madeline's newest post sat near the top of his feed. "Sometimes love disappears long before people admit it. I stayed longer than I should have because I believed loyalty meant sacrifice." Below the caption sat a carefully staged black and white photo of coffee beside rain-covered windows. Thousands of reactions. Supportive comments everywhere. "Stay strong, Maddie. You deserve peace. Proud of you for choosing yourself." One comment from Elaine Carter stood out immediately. "You carried that marriage alone for years." Treyson stared at the screen silently, not angry, studying. The language mattered. No direct accusations yet, only implication. Enough to shape perception without risking legal consequences. Careful, strategic. Madeline understood public image better than most people. At the hospital, whispers spread slower but deeper. People knew Treyson, not socially, practically. They knew he covered shifts nobody wanted, knew he repaired broken systems during blizzards, knew he donated Marrow less than 3 weeks earlier, so nobody approached him directly. But Treyson noticed the looks, questions hiding behind politeness. One afternoon, while replacing a faulty monitor in the surgical recovery unit, a nurse named Carla stepped beside him quietly. "You doing okay?" Treyson tightened a cable connector carefully before answering. "Fine." Carla folded her arms. "That woman hasn't been here much." Treyson looked up briefly. "What woman?" "Your wife." "Not wife anymore." "Not really." Carla shook her head slightly. "Noah's night nurses keep asking where family is." Treyson continued working silently. The nurse lowered her voice further. "She posts like she lives here, but honestly, most nights, it's just staff. And your brother-in-law." Brother-in-law. The word still applied legally, barely. Carla hesitated before adding, "You didn't hear that from me." Treyson gave a small nod. Then he finished repairing the monitor and moved on to the next room. That was another thing people misunderstood about quiet men. Silence did not mean absence of reaction. Sometimes silence meant the reaction was being stored carefully for later. 3 days later, Treyson stopped by Noah's isolation room after finishing a 12-hour shift. Noah looked marginally better, color returning slightly. Still weak, but awake longer now. A Cleveland Cavaliers game played softly on television while IV pumps clicked steadily beside the bed. "You look terrible," Noah muttered. "So do you." "Fair." Treyson sat slowly in the visitor chair, careful with his back. Noah noticed immediately. "You still hurting little?" "That means yes." Treyson shrugged. Noah studied him for several seconds. "Then Madeline says, you're barely speaking to her." Treyson looked toward the window. Outside snow melted slowly across hospital rooftops under gray skies. She tell you why Noah hesitated. She says things haven't been good for a while. That part technically was true. Not good and betrayal weren't the same thing. Treyson leaned back carefully. She moved out. Noah blinked. What? About a week ago. The room went silent except for the monitor beeping beside Noah's bed. What the hell are you talking about? She left. When? 3 days after transplant. Noah stared at him in disbelief. You're joking. Treyson didn't answer, because reality sounded ridiculous enough already. Noah looked genuinely shaken now. She never told me. Didn't think she would. That's insane. Treyson rubbed a hand slowly across the edge of his jaw. Noah looked down at the blanket over his legs. You gave me Marrow. Yeah. And she left while you were recovering. Again. Treyson stayed silent. Noah exhaled sharply and looked away toward the television. That's messed up. The words came out quietly, honestly. For the first time in weeks, Treyson felt something close to relief. Not because Noah defended him, because somebody finally reacted like the timeline actually mattered. The next Friday, Treyson stopped at Kroger after work around 11 p.m. He moved stiffly through the nearly empty store, buying frozen meals, coffee pods, and pain medication. Near the self-checkout lanes, he heard his name. Treyson. He turned slowly. A woman named Brittany Keller stood beside a shopping cart filled with wine and paper towels. She used to work with Madeline at Ashcroft Urban Realty. Her smile looked nervous immediately. Oh. Hey. Hey. Awkward silence followed. Then Brittany spoke too fast. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry things turned out this way. Treyson scanned the pain medication box without looking up. What way? Brittany shifted uncomfortably. You know, everything Madeline's been going through. There it was. Madeline's suffering. Not the affair, not the donor surgery, not the money transfers. Narratives rarely included inconvenient details. Treyson bagged groceries calmly. What exactly did she say? Brittany immediately regretted the conversation. Oh, nothing specific, no. I'm asking. She swallowed. She just said you checked out emotionally years ago. That she felt isolated. Isolated. Interesting choice considering Treyson spent months helping save her brother's life. Brittany hurried onward before Treyson could ask more. Well, take care. You too. Then she practically escaped toward the parking lot. Treyson loaded groceries into the Ford Escape slowly, while cold wind cut through the garage. Inside the car, he sat motionless for a moment. Then he opened his phone again. This time, he searched Madeline's public posts more carefully. Patterns appeared immediately. Subtle references, cryptic captions, strategic timing. One post from 2 months earlier stopped him cold. Hard to carry someone who refuses to grow with you. Posted the same week, Treyson completed donor compatibility testing. Another, some people know how to survive but not how to live. Posted 2 days before surgery. The groundwork had already been laid publicly before she left, like she was preparing witnesses. Treyson drove home through empty Columbus streets under freezing rain. The house waited dark and silent at the end of the block. Inside, he carried groceries into the kitchen and noticed another envelope resting near the coffee maker. Different handwriting, hospital stationery. He opened it carefully. Inside sat a handwritten note from one of Noah's transplant nurses. Thank you for what you did for him. Some people see more than you think. No signature. Just that. Treyson read the note twice, then folded it carefully and placed it inside the same folder containing the screenshots, banking records, and camera footage. Not emotional keepsakes. Evidence. Because by now, Treyson understood something clearly. Madeline Carter wasn't just leaving. She was building a case. And somewhere underneath all the polished social media captions and victim language, Treyson could feel something larger approaching. Noah Carter was not supposed to be walking yet. At least, not alone. The transplant floor at Riverside Methodist still kept him under strict monitoring. His immune system remained fragile, his energy inconsistent, his blood counts unstable enough that nurses checked charts every few hours. But recovery changed people slowly, and boredom changed them faster. By the 4th week after the transplant, Noah had started sitting up longer, eating small meals again, and pacing short distances around the isolation hallway with a mask covering most of his face. The nurses called it progress. Noah called it prison with better lighting. One Tuesday afternoon, he stood near the hallway window overlooking the parking garage while an IV pole rolled beside him. A younger nurse adjusted his medication line. "You need to sit before you pass out again." "I'm fine. You said that right before you hit the floor yesterday." Noah smirked weakly. "Fair point." The nurse checked his vitals one last time before leaving. Once she disappeared around the corner, Noah pulled out his phone and opened Facebook again. Another post from Madeline. Healing sometimes means walking away from what breaks you. Below it sat a professionally staged photo from a downtown wine bar. Candles. Cocktail glass. Perfect lighting. Noah stared at it for several long seconds. Something about the image irritated him immediately. Not because Madeline looked happy, because Treyson had looked exhausted the last time Noah saw him. The contrast felt wrong. Over the past 2 weeks, Noah had started noticing things he ignored before. Madeline visited less often than her posts implied. Sometimes, she claimed to stay all night, despite nurses quietly mentioning she left before midnight. Meanwhile, Treyson showed up consistently. Never dramatically, never posting photos, just appearing. Usually after work, usually carrying coffee, usually moving slower than before. The donor procedure had hit him harder than Treyson admitted. Noah could see it now. The stiffness when Treyson lowered himself into chairs. The brief flashes of pain crossing his face when he stood too quickly. The way he pressed one hand subtly against his lower back whenever he thought nobody noticed. Noah remembered something else too. The timeline. 3 days after transplant. That was when Madeline left. The realization kept bothering him. Deeply. That afternoon, Noah finally asked directly. A night nurse named Renee stood updating charts beside the hallway station when Noah stopped nearby. "Can I ask you something?" Renee looked up. "Depends. My sister really been here as much as she says?" The nurse paused carefully. Hospital staff learned quickly when families carried hidden fractures. Renee chose her words cautiously. "Your sister visits." That wasn't my question. She looked at him for another second, then sighed softly. "Your brother-in-law's been here more." Brother-in-law. Again. The word sounded strange now. Noah leaned against the wall quietly, and after surgery, Renee lowered her voice. "Treyson should have been resting. Instead, he kept checking on you." A slow heaviness settled in Noah's chest. Not guilt exactly, something uglier. awareness. Later that evening, Noah scrolled through older texts from Madeline. Most recent conversations centered around herself. Stress, pressure, exhaustion. Almost nothing about Treyson. Almost nothing about the donor surgery itself. Noah suddenly realized something uncomfortable. His sister talked about the transplant like an event, never a sacrifice. The next morning, Noah signed temporary outpatient clearance papers for supervised release visits. Technically, he was allowed short external trips now with precautions. Madeline offered immediately to take him home for a few hours. Noah declined. Instead, he called Treyson. "You busy?" A pause. Little. "Why? You mind driving me somewhere?" 40 minutes later, Treyson arrived wearing jeans, a gray Riverside hoodie, and the same faded navy jacket Noah had seen for years. He looked thinner, more tired, but still calm. Always calm. "You sure you should be out?" Treyson asked while helping Noah carefully into the Ford Escape. No clue. That earned a faint smile. They drove through Columbus under weak March sunlight, while classic rock played softly through old speakers. Neither spoke much at first. Then Noah glanced sideways. "You sleeping okay?" "Enough. Liar." Treyson kept his eyes on traffic. "You wanted somewhere specific. Your place." For the first time since entering the car, Treyson hesitated slightly. Noah noticed immediately. "You don't want me there?" "No. Just messy." That was also a lie. 20 minutes later, Treyson unlocked the apartment door near Dublin, Ohio. Small, temporary, plain. No decorations except a coffee maker work boots near the entrance and hospital maintenance manuals stacked beside the couch. Noah stepped inside slowly. "This where you've been staying?" "Mostly." "Trey." Noah stopped speaking. The place looked nothing like a man who left his marriage voluntarily. No personal touches, no comfort, just survival. On the kitchen counter sat pill bottles beside unopened medical bills. A heating pad rested over the couch arm. Noah stared at the setup quietly. Then he noticed Treyson moving stiffly toward the refrigerator. "You still hurting that bad?" Treyson grabbed bottled water without answering immediately. Finally, recovery takes time. How much time depends. Noah watched him carefully now. Really watched. The controlled movements, the fatigue behind the eyes, the silence that looked less natural lately and more deliberate. Then Noah saw something else. A folder, partially visible beneath several work documents on the kitchen table. Inside sat printed screenshots, bank transfers, hotel confirmations, text messages. Noah recognized Madeline's number instantly. Treyson noticed where his eyes landed. For a second, neither man moved. Then Noah asked quietly, "She cheated?" Treyson leaned against the counter, still silent. Noah understood anyway, when another pause. Then, before surgery. The room suddenly felt colder. She left because she was already with someone else. "Yeah? And you still went through with the transplant?" Treyson looked down at the bottle in his hands. "You were sick." The simplicity of the answer hit Noah harder than shouting ever could have. No bitterness, no martyr speech, just fact. "You were sick." Noah sat slowly onto the couch. For the first time since diagnosis, genuine shame crossed his face. Not because he caused the betrayal, because he benefited from Treyson's sacrifice, while completely unaware of what Treyson already knew. "She told people You checked out of the marriage. Treyson gave a tired half shrug. People hear what they want. That's not an answer. Noah. No. Seriously. Noah's voice sharpened unexpectedly. You gave me Marrow while she was planning to leave you. Treyson finally looked directly at him. Looks that way. Silence filled the apartment. Outside traffic moved faintly below the third-floor windows. A siren echoed somewhere downtown. Noah rubbed both hands slowly across his face. She's lying about you. Treyson said nothing. She's letting people think you're the problem. Still nothing. That silence bothered Noah more than anger would have, because angry people fought back immediately. Treyson was documenting, enduring, waiting. Eventually, Noah stood carefully. I need to ask you something. Okay. Do you have proof? Treyson looked toward the folder on the table, then back at Noah. Enough. Noah nodded slowly. For the first time since his diagnosis, the world around him felt rearranged. Not because Treyson changed, because Noah finally understood who Treyson had been the entire time. Quiet did not mean weak. Quiet meant controlled. And suddenly Noah realized something even more disturbing. If Madeline had lied this comfortably to everyone else, what else was she hiding? The divorce papers arrived on a Thursday morning. Certified mail. Franklin County Domestic Relations Court, stamped across the envelope in thick black print. Treyson Long stood outside his apartment door holding the package while cold winds swept through the parking lot. For a moment, he simply looked at it. Not shocked. Prepared. That was the difference now. He already understood Madeline Carter was not leaving emotionally anymore. She was transitioning strategically. Inside the apartment, Treyson set the envelope beside the coffee maker and poured himself stale black coffee before opening it. The petition ran 32 pages. Property division, asset requests, spousal support, formal allegations written in careful legal language. Treyson read every line slowly. Emotionally withdrawn husband, controlling behavior, psychological neglect, pattern of isolation. One sentence made him stop completely. Mrs. Carter Long carried the emotional and financial burden of the marriage for years, while Mr. Long disengaged from meaningful partnership responsibilities. Treyson read that sentence twice, then once more. Financial burden. He looked automatically toward the stack of medical bills sitting beside the refrigerator. Most had already been paid from his income. Noah's transportation costs, insurance gaps, temporary treatment expenses, all documented. The accusation itself wasn't what bothered him most. It was the precision. These weren't emotional outbursts. This was constructed narrative, language designed to position Treyson as unstable, absent, inadequate. And somewhere behind it, Treyson could almost feel another person shaping strategy alongside Madeline. Maybe Derek, maybe lawyers, maybe both. His phone buzzed before he finished reading the packet. Madeline, Treyson answered calmly. You got served. Yes. Silence. Then I didn't want it to happen this way. That sentence almost sounded rehearsed, okay? You're making this harder by refusing to communicate. Treyson stared down at paragraph after paragraph describing him like a stranger. You accused me of emotional abuse. Another pause. That's not what the filing says. It implies it. You know what I mean. Actually, Treyson did. Implication gave room for retreat later. Direct accusations required proof. Madeline was being careful. Again. I just want this handled maturely, she continued. You transferred over $100,000 before leaving. That was marital money. You moved it secretly. Trey, and you moved in with another man before the transplant recovery ended. Dead silence. For the first time in weeks, Madeline sounded genuinely unsettled. You're tracking me now? No. Technically, true. The camera system tracked the house automatically. You're twisting things. Treyson leaned against the kitchen counter carefully. His lower back still hurt during long periods standing. No. I'm documenting them. Another silence followed. Then Madeline's voice cooled noticeably. You've changed. Interesting accusation, because Treyson had not changed at all. He had simply stopped ignoring what he saw. The call ended 3 minutes later. Treyson finished reading the petition afterward in complete silence. At the bottom sat another surprise. Madeline requested temporary possession of the marital home, along with partial retirement account access, along with spousal support, despite leaving voluntarily. Despite the affair, despite the timing, Treyson closed the paperwork slowly. Then he opened his laptop. The search took less than 20 minutes. Grace Holloway, Columbus family attorney, known for financial litigation and forensic divorce cases. Not flashy, not social media famous, but respected, especially by judges. Her office occupied the 6th floor of an older brick building near German Village. Minimal decoration, quiet reception area, framed law degrees, no inspirational quotes on walls. Treyson liked the place immediately. Grace Holloway herself looked exactly how Treyson expected. Early 50s, sharp gray suit, silver hair pulled neatly back, eyes that missed very little. She read the divorce filing without interrupting once. No dramatic reactions, just steady page turns. Finally, she looked up. You donated Marrow to her brother? Yes. And she left 3 days later? Yes. Interesting timing. Grace set the papers down carefully. Tell me everything. Start at the beginning. So Treyson did. Not emotionally, chronologically, the hospital testing, the surgery, the affair evidence, the transfers, the social media posts, the camera footage. Grace asked very few questions during the first hour. That worried Treyson slightly. Then he mentioned the donor recovery timeline. Grace finally leaned back. Do you still have all documentation? Yes. How organized? Treyson opened the messenger bag beside his chair and removed 3 labeled folders. Bank records, digital screenshots, medical timeline. Grace stared at him for a second. Then a very small smile appeared. You work around systems, don't you? Hospital equipment. Makes sense. She opened the folders carefully. Every transfer highlighted. Every screenshot dated. Every camera file backed up with timestamps. Grace studied the evidence silently for several minutes. Then she looked directly at Treyson. Did you confront her? No. Not once. No. Grace tapped one finger lightly against the desk. That helps. How? Because angry people destroy credibility. Quiet people with documentation are dangerous. Treyson said nothing. Grace continued reviewing materials. At one point, she stopped at the banking transfers to Halpern Consulting Group. Who's Halpern Regional Director at her company? The affair partner? Yes. Grace nodded slowly. Then your wife made a mistake. Treyson looked up. She underestimated what calm men usually keep records of. The sentence landed heavily because it sounded true. Grace turned several more pages. Do you know what concerns me most? The money, no. She slid the timeline toward him. The overlap. Treyson looked down. donor surgery date, hospital discharge, transfer dates, hotel stays, departure timeline. Everything collided together visually in black ink. Grace folded her hands. She built a public, emotional narrative while you were undergoing medical procedures for her family. That matter, legally, in court, maybe. But psychologically, Grace's eyes sharpened slightly. Very much. For the first time since entering the office, Treyson felt something shift. Not revenge, structure, order. Like someone finally saw the full picture instead of fragments. Grace closed the folders carefully. From this point forward, you don't respond emotionally. No social media, no public arguments, no retaliation posts. I wasn't planning to. Good. She reached for a legal pad. Because people constructing false narratives often overbuild them. They get confident. They add unnecessary details. Eventually, contradictions appear. Grace wrote several notes quickly, then looked back up. I want copies of every financial record from the last 12 months. Full account histories, credit cards too. You think there's more? I think people rarely start hiding money only once. That sentence stayed with Treyson. Before leaving, he signed representation paperwork quietly. Grace walked him toward the office door afterward. One more thing, she said. Treyson stopped. When this escalates, and it will, you let me respond first. Why? Grace's expression remained calm. Because your wife thinks she's controlling perception. A brief pause. People like that usually mistake silence for weakness. Outside, late afternoon sunlight reflected off wet Columbus sidewalks while Treyson walked carefully toward the parking garage. His hips still hurt. The donor recovery fatigue still lingered heavily in his body. But for the first time since Madeline left the situation, no longer felt chaotic. Patterns were forming now. Timelines. Contradictions. Evidence. As Treyson opened the Ford escape door, his phone buzzed again. This time it was Noah. You free tonight? Treyson stared at the message briefly. Then another text arrived. I found something weird about Maddie's fundraiser account. Treyson's expression changed almost invisibly. Slowly, he closed the car door again and looked back toward the city skyline. Because suddenly, the divorce no longer looked like the biggest problem in front of him. Noah Carter looked nervous when Treyson arrived at the outpatient transplant clinic 2 nights later. Not sick nervous, guilty nervous. He sat inside a private consultation room wearing a gray hoodie over hospital sweats while rain hammered softly against the windows outside Riverside Methodist Hospital. A half-finished cup of broth sat untouched beside him. Treyson closed the door quietly behind himself. You okay? Noah rubbed both hands together slowly. Depends. That answer alone told Treyson this conversation mattered. Noah reached toward a manila envelope sitting beside his chair. I wasn't snooping, he said immediately. At least, not intentionally. Treyson waited. The fundraiser account statements got mailed to Mom's house by mistake. Noah slid several printed pages across the table. I opened them because I thought they were medical bills. Treyson looked down. The paperwork carried the logo for Hope Forward Foundation, the crowdfunding platform Madeline used during Noah's leukemia treatment. Donation totals, withdrawal summaries, linked business accounts. Then Treyson saw the numbers. Nearly $190,000 raised. His expression didn't change, but Noah noticed the stillness immediately. I never saw that much money, Noah said quietly. Treyson kept reading. The fundraiser description used Noah's diagnosis heavily. Photos from the transplant floor, emotional captions, prayer requests, updates about family sacrifices. One line stood out sharply. Every dollar goes directly toward Noah's treatment and recovery. But the withdrawal records told a different story. Large transfers moved repeatedly into accounts connected to Ashcroft Urban Realty consulting subsidiaries, including Halpern Consulting Group. Noah leaned back weakly against the chair. I checked with billing. Treyson looked up slowly. What billing? Billing. Noah swallowed hard. Most of my major treatment expenses were already covered through insurance and hospital assistance. A long silence followed. Rain continued hitting the window steadily. Machines beeped somewhere outside in the hallway. Noah looked sick again suddenly. Not physically. Personally. She used my cancer, he said quietly. Treyson lowered the paperwork carefully onto the table. Maybe there's an explanation, but even as he said it, neither man believed it. Noah laughed once without humor. You still do that. What? Try to make things less ugly than they are. Treyson looked toward the dark window. Maybe. Or maybe he simply preferred facts before conclusions. That habit had protected him for years. But now the facts were accumulating faster than excuses could contain them. The next morning, Treyson sat inside Grace Holloway's office again while she reviewed the fundraiser records. This time, her expression changed immediately. That she said flatly is extremely bad. Treyson sat across from her silently. Grace flipped through pages faster. These transfers don't align with stated charitable purpose disclosures. You think it's fraud? I think it's something a forensic accountant should examine immediately. Grace stood and walked toward a shelf near the back wall, pulling out a thick legal binder. Charitable misuse cases get ugly fast because courts hate emotional exploitation. She glanced back toward Treyson, especially medical exploitation. Treyson thought about Noah lying inside isolation rooms while strangers donated money, believing they were helping treatment costs. Meanwhile, money moved elsewhere quietly. Grace returned to the desk. Did Madeline personally control these accounts? Yes. Good. That word sounded strange in context. Grace clarified immediately. Good for evidence. Bad for her. She began writing notes rapidly. Right now, your biggest advantage is behavioral consistency. Treyson frowned slightly. Grace continued. She's performing emotionally online while you continue behaving predictably in real life. Work. Medical recovery. Documentation. No public retaliation. Another note. Judges notice stability. Treyson leaned back carefully. His lower back still stiffened after long periods sitting. She's escalating. Yes, Grace agreed calmly. Because she thinks perception equals protection. Grace stopped writing, then looked directly at him. People who manipulate narratives usually become reckless once they believe everyone already agrees with them. Later that afternoon, Treyson returned to Riverside for work. The hospital felt strangely normal compared to everything outside it. Machines still broke. Patients still arrived. Staff still rushed between departments, carrying charts and coffee cups. Predictable systems. He preferred that. Inside the imaging workshop, Treyson spent nearly 3 hours replacing components inside a malfunctioning CT scanner while maintenance radio chatter echoed softly overhead. For a little while, focusing on machinery quieted everything else. Then his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Treyson almost ignored it. Instead, he answered. "Hello." A man's voice responded immediately. "Mr. Long, this is Aaron Feldman with Channel 6 News." Treyson's expression hardened instantly. "How'd you get this number?" "We're covering a local family cancer support story tied to your wife's fundraiser campaign." "Of course." The public narrative was expanding now. "We wanted a statement regarding the separation allegations online." Treyson stared at the partially dismantled CT panel in front of him. No statement. "Mr. Long, there are claims you abandoned your wife emotionally during her brother's treatment." Click. Treyson ended the call, then immediately forwarded the number to Grace Holloway. Minutes later, another message arrived. This time from Madeline herself. "Why are reporters contacting me saying you hired an attorney?" Treyson read the text twice, then locked the phone without replying. Across the workshop, another technician glanced toward him carefully. Word was spreading wider now. That evening, Treyson stopped by Noah's apartment-sized recovery suite before heading home. Noah looked stronger than the week before. Still pale, still thin, but more alert. A Cavaliers game played quietly again while transplant medications dripped through IV lines. Noah looked up immediately. "You talked to Grace?" "Yeah." And Treyson sat carefully in the chair beside the bed. "She's bringing in a forensic accountant." Noah exhaled slowly. "So it's real. We don't know everything yet." "Come on, Trey." Treyson remained silent. Noah shook his head bitterly. "I spent months thinking my sister was holding everything together." Treyson looked toward the IV pump. "People show different faces under pressure." "That's too generous." "Maybe." But Treyson still refused to sound hateful. That refusal bothered Noah more each day, because it highlighted the contrast. Madeline publicly sharpened narratives, while Treyson kept reducing everything to facts. Eventually, Noah spoke again. "She's telling people you isolated yourself from the family." Treyson almost smiled faintly. "I spent 6 weeks driving your mother to appointments." "I know. She just needs a villain." The room went quiet after that. Noah stared at the television without really watching it. Then suddenly, "You know what scares me most?" Treyson waited. "She thinks she's going to win." That sentence lingered heavily between them. Because Noah was right. Madeline still behaved like someone fully in control. Still posting carefully curated captions. Still attending social events. Still telling mutual friends selective versions of the marriage. No visible panic. No retreat. Which meant she either underestimated the evidence or believed nobody would care about it. That night, Treyson returned to the apartment near Dublin carrying another stack of copied financial records from Grace's office. Rain followed him home again, cold, steady. Inside, he spread documents carefully across the kitchen table. Bank transfers, hotel stays, medical schedules, donor recovery timelines, security footage timestamps, fundraiser withdrawals. The paper trail no longer looked emotional. It looked mathematical. Patterns overlapping each other perfectly. At 11:38 p.m., Treyson's laptop chimed softly. New email. Sender Madeline Carter Long. Subject line: "We need to stop this before it gets ugly." Treyson opened the message slowly. Inside sat 3 short paragraphs demanding private negotiation before false assumptions damage everyone involved. But the final sentence mattered most. "You know Nobody will believe your version over mine. Treyson stared at the screen for a long moment. Then very quietly, he forwarded the email directly to Grace Holloway. The fundraiser took place on a Saturday night inside the ballroom of the Westin Great Southern Hotel in downtown Columbus. By 6:30, valet attendants were already jogging through cold spring rain while guests stepped out wearing tailored coats and polished shoes. Inside soft jazz floated beneath crystal chandeliers. A giant projection screen displayed smiling photos of Noah Carter during treatment. Another slide read, "Fighting Leukemia Together." Below it sat the logo for Madeline's fundraiser campaign. Hope for Noah. Treyson Long stared at the hotel entrance from inside his parked Ford Escape across the street. He had no intention of going inside, but Grace Holloway insisted they observe. People get careless during victory laps, she told him earlier that morning. Tonight looked exactly like a victory lap. Madeline had rebuilt her image publicly over the past month with surgical precision. Online supporters, corporate donors, local lifestyle bloggers, even a short television segment from Channel 6. In every version of the story, Madeline appeared exhausted but brave. The devoted sister, the abandoned wife, the woman carrying impossible burdens with grace. And almost nobody questioned it until the accounting records appeared. Grace sat in the passenger seat beside Treyson, reviewing printed documents beneath the parking garage lights. "You notice the sponsor list?" she asked. Treyson glanced toward the hotel banners. Ashcroft Urban Realty, Halpern Consulting Group, several medical charity partners. Grace tapped one fingernail against the folder. She mixed personal business structures with charitable donation processing. Another tap. That's either arrogance or stupidity. Maybe both. Grace almost smiled. Good answer. Across the street, photographers snapped pictures as guests entered the ballroom. Then Madeline appeared. Elegant black dress, hair professionally styled, perfect posture. She paused deliberately beneath the fundraiser sign while cameras flashed. Derek Halpern stood only a few feet behind her, not hidden anymore, just unofficial, subtle enough for deniability, obvious enough for insiders. Treyson watched silently through rain-speckled windshield glass. No visible anger crossed his face, but something colder settled there now. Recognition. Grace studied him briefly. "You okay?" "Yeah." "Liar." Treyson looked back toward the hotel. She used his hospital photos. Grace followed his gaze. The projection screen inside now displayed images from Noah's transplant recovery floor. One photo included Treyson partially visible in the background near an IV machine. His face cropped out intentionally. Only his arm remained. The donor reduced to scenery. Grace noticed it too. "That's deliberate." Treyson said nothing, because he already knew. Inside the ballroom, the fundraiser began at 7. Grace had arranged access through a private investigator posing as a donor representative. Audio recordings were legal under Ohio's one-party consent laws as long as the investigator participated directly in conversations. Again, quiet preparation mattered. At 7:42 p.m., the investigator texted Grace. She's speaking now. Grace opened the audio feed. Madeline's voice filled the car softly through phone speakers. When Noah got diagnosed, she said emotionally, "Our family faced the darkest moment of our lives." Applause followed. Treyson listened without expression. Madeline continued smoothly. There were nights I honestly didn't think we'd survive emotionally or financially. Another applause break. Grace glanced sideways briefly. Financially, she repeated quietly. Interesting choice considering the insurance records. Inside the ballroom, Madeline's performance deepened. I learned very quickly who was truly willing to stand beside us. Treyson's jaw tightened slightly at that sentence. Not because she excluded him, because she was monetizing sacrifice she did not make. Then came the final line. No family should ever feel abandoned during medical crisis. Standing ovation. Treyson looked away from the windshield toward the dark parking structure ceiling above them. For several seconds, neither he nor Grace spoke. Finally, Grace muttered, "She's overplaying it now." 30 minutes later, the private investigator sent another message. "Need you to hear this." A new audio file arrived immediately afterward. Background noise filled the recording first. Music, glassware, people laughing, then Derek's voice. "Told you this would blow over." Madeline laughed softly. "She's still buying the victim thing." "Completely," Derek answered. More laughter. Then Madeline again. "Trey never fights back. That's his problem." The sentence sat heavily in the silence inside the Ford Escape. Grace slowly lowered the phone. That recording alone changes leverage. Treyson stared toward the hotel entrance. "Noah hear any of this yet?" "No," Grace answered immediately. "And we keep it that way for now." At 9:15 p.m., the ballroom event ended. Guests filtered outside carrying gift bags and half-finished cocktails while rain finally stopped over downtown Columbus. Madeline stood near the entrance, hugging donors dramatically. Derek handled business conversations nearby. Neither noticed Treyson's vehicle parked across the street. Grace continued reviewing fundraiser documents beneath the dashboard light. Then suddenly, she stopped flipping pages. What Grace held up, one withdrawal summary. Here, Treyson leaned closer. Large transfer. $48,000. Destination account. Halpern Consulting Group. Consulting retainer. Date of transfer. 2 days after Noah's transplant. The same week, Treyson struggled to walk unassisted after marrow extraction. Grace exhaled slowly. "That's bad." Treyson looked at the paperwork quietly. "What kind of consulting exactly?" She flipped another page, then another. Patterns emerged fast. Repeated withdrawals labeled as campaign management expenses, luxury hotel charges, restaurant bills, travel reimbursements, all connected indirectly through business structures Derek controlled. Grace leaned back against the seat. She turned a leukemia fundraiser into a private slush fund. The wording sounded brutal because it fit too well. Across the street, Madeline finally stepped away from the crowd. Derek touched her lower back casually while leading her toward a black BMW. Not secret anymore. Not careful anymore. Confidence had made them visible. Grace watched them enter the vehicle. "Affairs make people reckless," she said quietly. "But successful deception makes them stupid." The BMW disappeared into downtown traffic seconds later. Inside the Ford Escape, Treyson remained motionless. His body still hurt from donor recovery. The deep ache in his hips returned anytime stress tightened his muscles. But the physical pain barely registered tonight because something else had become undeniable now. This was no longer just betrayal. It was exploitation of Noah, of donors, of public sympathy, of truth itself. Grace gathered the paperwork into organized stacks. We move carefully from here. How carefully? Very. She looked directly at Treyson. Because once financial misuse enters litigation, attorneys stop thinking emotionally. Judges, too. Treyson nodded slowly. Outside downtown, traffic lights reflected across wet streets beneath the Columbus skyline. For months, Madeline controlled perception through emotion. But paper trails were different. Paper trails didn't care who cried harder online. Before starting the engine, Grace's phone buzzed once more. Another message from the investigator, short, urgent. Grace opened it. Then her expression changed instantly. What? She turned the screen toward Treyson. Photo attachment. Inside the fundraiser office suite upstairs, boxes of unopened donor mail sat stacked beside accounting folders. On top of one box rested a handwritten note. Transfer remaining funds. Monday before audit review. Treyson stared at the image silently. Grace looked toward the dark street ahead. Then she said the first genuinely dangerous sentence Treyson had heard all night. She already knows someone's getting close. Franklin County Domestic Relations Court sat beneath a gray April sky the morning of the preliminary hearing. Rainwater streaked down the courthouse windows, while attorneys carrying leather briefcases moved quickly through security lines. Treyson Long arrived 15 minutes early. Not because Grace Holloway told him to, because he always arrived early. He wore a charcoal suit that fit slightly loose after the past 2 months. Donor recovery and stress had stripped weight from his frame. The bruising near his lower back had finally faded yellow beneath the skin, but the stiffness remained. Inside courtroom 4B, fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. The room smelled faintly of old paper and wet coats. Grace sat beside Treyson, reviewing notes calmly. Across the aisle, Madeline Carter Long entered exactly at 9. Elegant, cream-colored suit, perfect makeup, controlled expression. Derek Halpern was not present. But Treyson noticed his influence anyway, the confidence, the posture, the performance. Madeline avoided looking directly at Treyson until she sat beside her attorney, a polished family litigator named Stephen Rayner. Rayner smiled the way expensive attorneys often smiled. Professional, dismissive, like outcomes already belonged to him. Judge Eleanor Vance entered 3 minutes later. Mid-60s, sharp glasses, no patience for theatrics. Treyson noticed that immediately and silently appreciated it. The hearing began with procedural matters first. Property occupancy, temporary financial requests, disclosure schedules. Then Stephen Rayner stood, and the performance started. Your Honor, he began smoothly. Mrs. Carter Long has spent years carrying emotional responsibility within a profoundly disconnected marriage. Treyson sat motionless. Rayner continued pacing slowly. During her brother's cancer crisis, she experienced overwhelming emotional abandonment from the one person she believed would support her. Grace did not react. Neither did Treyson. That irritated Rayner slightly. He pressed harder. My client felt isolated, financially burdened, and psychologically exhausted long before separation occurred. Psychologically exhausted. Interesting phrase, especially considering who underwent surgery recently. Rayner painted the picture carefully. Cold husband, emotionally absent technician, man more comfortable with machines than people. Madeline lowered her eyes at exactly the right moments. Subtle, practiced. Judge Vance listened without visible expression while taking occasional notes. Then Rayner made the mistake. She remained committed to supporting both her husband and terminally ill brother simultaneously. Grace finally moved. Only slightly. But Treyson noticed immediately, because terminal mattered legally. AML was serious, not terminal. Rayner exaggerated for emotional effect. Grace wrote one sentence onto a yellow notepad and slid it toward Treyson. People who lie emotionally always add extra details. Treyson almost smiled faintly. When Rayner finally finished, the courtroom settled into silence. Then Grace Holloway stood. No dramatics, no pacing, just organized folders and a calm voice. "Your Honor," she said evenly. Opposing counsel described emotional abandonment repeatedly this morning. She opened the first binder carefully. "So let's establish a timeline." Everything changed after that, because emotion controlled rooms only until documentation entered them. Grace approached the clerk and handed over printed exhibits, medical procedure records, hospital recovery dates, visitor logs, donation schedules. She spoke clearly. On March 3rd, Mr. Long underwent bone marrow extraction surgery at Riverside Methodist Hospital. Judge Vance looked down at the documents. Grace continued. 3 days later, while recovering from donor complications, he returned home to discover Mrs. Carter Long had vacated the marital residence. No reaction from Treyson. But across the room, Madeline's posture shifted slightly. Grace noticed. Then came the second binder. During this same recovery period, Grace said calmly, Mrs. Carter Long transferred substantial joint marital funds into accounts associated with a third party. Stephen Rayner stood immediately. Objection. Relevance. Grace didn't even look at him. Directly relevant to financial disclosure and marital conduct surrounding requested support claims. Judge Vance extended one hand calmly. Overruled for now. Continue. Grace handed forward bank transfer records. Highlighted. Time-stamped. Professional. Treyson watched Judge Vance's eyes narrow slightly while reading. Then Grace delivered the next piece carefully. We also have security footage placing Mr. Halpern at the marital residence during Mr. Long's medical recovery period. Madeline finally looked directly at Treyson. Not emotional. Alarmed. For the first time, Treyson saw uncertainty enter her expression. Grace remained clinical. No accusation is being made regarding morality, Your Honor. Only factual sequence. That sentence mattered. No emotional attack. Only order. Only chronology. Grace then introduced another document set. Visitor records from Riverside Methodist Hospital. Nurse logs. Time-stamped visitation access. Despite extensive public claims of full-time family support involvement, Grace stated hospital records indicate Mr. Long visited Noah Carter significantly more frequently during recovery than Mrs. Carter Long. Stephen Rayner objected again. Counsel is attempting character assassination. Grace turned toward him calmly. No. I'm correcting a narrative. Judge Vance reviewed the records quietly. The courtroom atmosphere shifted almost invisibly after that. Small things changed first. Rayner stopped smiling. Madeline stopped making eye contact with the judge. Even the court reporter seemed more attentive. Because the story no longer sounded clean, it sounded constructed. Grace saved the worst evidence for last, the fundraiser records. She didn't accuse anyone directly, not yet. Instead, she approached carefully. Your Honor, additional financial concerns have recently emerged involving public, charitable fundraising connected to this matter. Madeline's attorney stiffened immediately. We strongly object to introducing unrelated speculation. Grace nodded once. Agreed. Which is why I'm not introducing conclusions today. She placed several pages onto the evidence stand. Only documented transfers requiring forensic review. Judge Vance examined the records, then looked up slowly. These transfers occurred during the medical recovery period. Yes, Your Honor. Into accounts associated with Halpern Consulting Group? Yes. Madeline finally spoke for the first time. That was campaign management consulting. Her voice sounded sharper than before, too fast. Judge Vance looked directly at her. Mrs. Carter Long, your attorney speaks for you today. Madeline immediately fell silent again, but the damage was already done. People telling truth usually stayed calm under simple questions. People protecting narratives rushed to explain. Grace saw it too. So did Treyson. The hearing continued another 40 minutes, mostly procedural afterward. Discovery deadlines, financial disclosures, temporary asset restrictions. Then Judge Vance delivered the final order calmly. No significant marital assets are to be transferred, concealed, or reassigned pending full review. That mattered because it froze movement, exactly what Grace wanted. Then the judge added something else. Both parties are instructed to avoid public commentary capable of influencing proceedings. This time, Judge Vance looked directly at Madeline while saying it. Subtle, but unmistakable. The hearing adjourned shortly afterward. People gathered paperwork quietly. Chairs scraped against courtroom floors. Madeline stood beside her attorney, whispering urgently while avoiding Treyson completely now. Grace organized documents slowly before speaking. She's rattled. How can you tell? She interrupted twice emotionally. Grace closed another binder. Confident liars stay patient. As they exited into the courthouse hallway, reporters waited near the entrance. Not many. Only local media. But enough. Questions started immediately. Mrs. Carter Long, any response to financial allegations? Mr. Long, did you know about the affair before surgery? Madeline's attorney shielded her toward elevators quickly. Grace did the opposite. She kept Treyson moving steadily without responding once. Outside, cold winds swept across courthouse steps beneath dark clouds. Grace finally stopped beside the parking structure. One thing matters now, she said quietly. What? She still thinks. This is a divorce case. Treyson looked toward the courthouse doors where reporters still waited. And it's not. Grace slid fundraiser records back into her briefcase. No. A brief pause. Not anymore. At that exact moment, Treyson's phone buzzed. A message from Noah. Need to talk ASAP. Mom just admitted something about the fundraiser money. Treyson looked up slowly from the screen, then toward Grace, because suddenly the courtroom hearing felt like only the beginning. Noah Carter looked exhausted when Treyson arrived at his apartment later that evening. Not physically exhausted, emotionally hollow. The kind of exhaustion that settled behind the eyes after illusions finally collapsed. Rain tapped steadily against the windows while a muted weather report flickered across the television. Several medication bottles sat lined up on the kitchen counter beside electrolyte drinks and transplant paperwork. Noah sat at the table staring at his phone. He didn't look up immediately when Treyson entered. "You okay?" Noah laughed once under his breath. "No." Treyson closed the apartment door quietly behind him. "What happened?" For several seconds, Noah said nothing. Then he slid his phone across the table. Audio recording 3 minutes, 11 seconds. "I recorded Mom earlier," Noah said flatly. "Accidentally at first." Treyson picked up the phone slowly, recorded what she thought I was asleep. Treyson pressed play. Elaine Carter's voice filled the kitchen softly through the speaker. "Told Madeline this was going too far already." Another voice answered immediately. Madeline. Sharp. Frustrated. If Treyson wanted peace, he should have signed everything quietly. Noah stared at the floor while the recording continued. Elaine sounded nervous. "But the money situation, we needed it. That's not the same thing." Then came the sentence that changed everything. "He donated Marrow because he wanted to. Nobody forced him." Silence followed briefly on the recording. Then Madeline again. "And honestly, if he hadn't done it, everyone would have hated him anyway." The audio ended. Rain continued outside. Inside the apartment, nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally, Noah whispered, "She said that about you." Treyson placed the phone carefully back onto the table. No visible anger crossed his face. But Noah noticed the stillness immediately. The deeper kind, not shock anymore. Final understanding. "She used you," Noah said quietly. Treyson looked toward the dark window. "Looks that way." "No." Noah shook his head harder now. "Not just emotionally. Publicly. Financially. Everything." Treyson stayed silent, because there wasn't much left to argue against anymore. Noah leaned forward slowly, elbows against knees. "I need to testify." That got Treyson's attention immediately. "Noah, I'm serious. You're still recovering." "I don't care." Treyson did. That was the difference between them, even now. Noah stood abruptly, then winced as dizziness forced him to steady himself against the table. "She turned my cancer into branding." "Sit down." "She lied about you to everyone." "Noah." "She left you while you could barely walk." The words echoed sharply through the apartment. Treyson watched him quietly. Noah's breathing had become uneven now. Anger mixed dangerously with physical weakness. Finally, Treyson crossed the room and guided him carefully back into the chair. "You pass out, Dr. Mercer's gonna blame me." That earned the faintest laugh. Then silence settled again. Noah rubbed both hands over his face slowly. "I keep replaying everything." "What things?" "The hospital." Noah looked up. "You were always there." Treyson leaned against the kitchen counter carefully. His lower back still tightened during long periods standing. "She wasn't." Noah continued staring at the floor. "She posted like she was carrying everything, but you were the one driving me to treatment." Another pause. "You slept in waiting rooms." Treyson shrugged slightly. "No big deal." Noah looked genuinely angry now. "That's the problem. What is... You keep acting like none of this matters." Treyson thought about that carefully before answering. "It matters. Then why don't you sound angry?" The question hung heavily between them. Finally, Treyson spoke quietly. "Because anger doesn't change facts." Noah sat back slowly. For the first time since diagnosis, he finally understood something fundamental about Treyson Long. Calm was not weakness. It was discipline. The next hearing took place 11 days later. This time, the courtroom felt different. before proceedings even began. More people, more reporters, more tension. The fundraiser records had quietly leaked into local discussion after financial review requests became public filing matters. Nothing criminal officially yet, but enough smoke for people to start asking questions. Madeline entered the courtroom wearing dark navy instead of cream this time, more conservative, less polished. Derek Halpern was absent completely. That absence mattered too. Treyson noticed everything. Grace Holloway noticed more. "She looks tired," Grace muttered while organizing binders. Across the aisle, Stephen Rayner no longer carried the same easy confidence either. His posture looked tighter now, more cautious. Judge Eleanor Vance entered precisely at 9 again. The hearing began immediately. Financial review motions first, discovery compliance next. Then Grace stood. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "Mr. Noah Carter has requested permission to provide limited testimony regarding timeline and fundraising representations." Stephen Rayner objected instantly. "Mr. Carter is medically vulnerable and emotionally compromised." Grace didn't even blink. Mr. Carter specifically requested appearance. Judge Vance adjusted her glasses. "Bring him in." The courtroom doors opened seconds later. Noah entered slowly beside a court assistant. Thinner than before, paler, still visibly recovering, but walking on his own. The room quieted immediately because sick people changed atmospheres. Noah took the witness seat carefully. Madeline looked genuinely unsettled now for the first time since proceedings began. Not angry, afraid. After swearing him in, Grace approached carefully. "Mr. Carter, how long were you hospitalized during treatment?" "Almost 7 weeks total. And during that period, who visited you most consistently?" Noah answered without hesitation. "Treyson." Across the room, Madeline's jaw tightened slightly. Grace continued calmly. "Did Mr. Long assist with your transportation insurance paperwork or treatment scheduling before surgery?" "Yes." "How often?" "Almost constantly." Grace nodded once. "Did your sister remain equally present during recovery?" Stephen Rayner stood immediately. Objection. Comparative characterization. Judge Vance looked toward Noah. "You may answer carefully." Noah swallowed once. Then no. The courtroom remained completely silent. Grace moved slowly now. No rushing. No dramatics. "Did you become aware of your sister's separation from Mr. Long during your transplant recovery?" "Yes." "How he told me after she already moved out." "And when did she move out?" Noah looked directly toward the judge. 3 days after Treyson donated Marrow. No sound followed that sentence. Not even paper movement. Because hearing the timeline aloud changed its weight. Grace approached the final questions carefully. "Mr. Carter, did Mr. Long ever attempt to turn you against your sister?" "No." "Did he ever publicly attack her online?" "No." "Did he ever ask you to testify today?" "No." Grace stepped back. No further questions. Stephen Rayner rose slowly for cross-examination, but his tone had changed now. Less aggressive, more cautious. "Mr. Carter," he began, "you love your sister, correct?" Noah looked exhausted suddenly. "Yes." "And this illness has placed enormous emotional strain on your family, yeah? So misunderstandings may exist regarding finances and relationships." "No." The interruption startled everyone slightly. Rayner paused. Noah continued quietly. "There's no misunderstanding." He looked briefly toward Treyson for the first time since entering the courtroom, then back toward the judge. "Treyson gave me Marrow while she was planning an exit." The sentence landed harder than any legal argument so far. Because it sounded simple, human, impossible to polish. Rayner attempted another question. Your recovery medications could affect emotional interpretation? Noah cut him off again. I saw the records. Another silence. Judge Vance watched Noah carefully over folded hands. Then finally, that's enough. Cross-examination ended less than 4 minutes later. As Noah stepped carefully down from the witness stand, Madeline avoided looking at him completely. That mattered most, because people could lie to strangers easier than family, but family testimony changed rooms. Outside the courthouse afterward, reporters crowded harder than before. Questions flew everywhere. Mr. Carter, do you believe donor funds were misused, Mrs. Carter? Long any response to your brother's testimony? Grace guided Treyson silently toward the parking structure again, without answering. Halfway there, Treyson glanced back once. Madeline stood frozen near courthouse steps, surrounded by cameras. For the first time since this began, her expression no longer looked controlled. It looked isolated. And somewhere deep underneath the noise, Treyson realized the balance had finally shifted. Not because he fought louder, because truth had finally entered the room from someone nobody expected. The collapse started quietly, not with sirens, not with arrests, just absence. 3 days after Noah testified, Derek Halpern stopped appearing beside Madeline entirely. No more restaurant photos, no more background sightings at charity events, no more subtle appearances in reflected mirrors or tagged locations. Gone. People who built careers protecting image usually disappeared. The second liability became public. Derek fit that pattern perfectly. Treyson Long noticed it while eating breakfast alone at a diner near Dublin before work. The television mounted above the counter played a local news segment about financial irregularities tied to a regional medical fundraiser. No names officially announced yet, but enough details matched. The waitress refilled Treyson's coffee carefully. You okay, honey? You look tired. Long week. That was true. Even after donor recovery improved, exhaustion still lingered in strange waves. Some mornings, his lower back felt normal. Other mornings, it tightened sharply before he even left bed. Stress slowed healing. Grace Holloway reminded him of that constantly. Your body still thinks it survived trauma, she said during one meeting. Maybe it had. Not just surgical trauma, trust trauma. The final divorce settlement conference took place in a smaller private courtroom without media access. No reporters, no spectators, only attorneys, court staff, and Judge Eleanor Vance. Madeline entered looking different this time. Not polished. Tired. The confidence that once surrounded her had thinned noticeably over recent weeks. Public support online shifted after Noah's testimony leaked into local reporting. Questions replaced sympathy. Old fundraiser donors started demanding transparency. Ashcroft Urban Realty quietly removed Madeline from several public-facing campaigns. Nobody announced disciplinary action directly, but corporate distancing had already begun. Treyson noticed all of it without satisfaction. That part surprised even him. Because revenge sounded emotionally rewarding in theory, reality mostly felt sad. Judge Vance reviewed final financial disclosures for nearly 40 minutes before speaking. After examining timelines, conduct records, asset transfers, and submitted evidence, she began calmly. The court finds substantial credibility concerns regarding Mrs. Carter Long's financial representations. Madeline stared straight ahead. No reaction. But her attorney's shoulders tightened immediately. Judge Vance continued. Temporary support requests are denied. Stephen Rayner attempted objection. Denied immediately. Then came the next ruling. Funds transferred during undisclosed separation, preparation, are subject to reimbursement, consideration. Another blow. Grace remained expressionless beside Treyson. Professional, prepared. The judge turned pages carefully. The marital residence shall proceed toward equitable liquidation under revised division terms, favoring reimbursement for documented unilateral financial depletion. In simple terms, Madeline lost control of the house, lost leverage over support, lost the financial narrative entirely, but Judge Vance saved the harshest words for the end. Separate referral regarding charitable fundraising discrepancies will proceed independently through appropriate financial review channels. Not criminal charges yet, but close enough that the courtroom air changed instantly. Madeline finally spoke, quietly. You're making me sound like a criminal. Judge Vance looked directly at her. No, Mrs. Carter Long. A pause. Your records are doing that. Silence filled the room afterward. Heavy, complete. The conference ended 15 minutes later. No dramatic outbursts followed. No emotional breakdowns. Just paperwork, pens, signatures. The slow administrative sound of consequences arriving. Outside the courthouse, spring sunlight finally broke through clouds over Columbus for the first time in days. Grace walked beside Treyson toward the parking garage. You won, she said simply. Treyson looked ahead. Doesn't feel like it. That's because decent people don't enjoy watching collapse up close. They reached the fort escape. Grace paused before Treyson opened the door. One last piece of advice. Treyson waited. When people spend months trying to turn you into the villain, don't waste energy proving you're the hero. She adjusted her briefcase straps slightly. Just stay factual. Treyson nodded once. That had been his strategy from the beginning. Not because it was clever, because it was the only thing he trusted anymore. 2 weeks later, Noah invited Treyson to lunch near the Scioto Mile downtown. It was the first time Noah looked genuinely healthy again. Still thinner than before leukemia, still carrying medication routines and follow-up appointments, but alive, strong enough to walk without fatigue, strong enough to laugh normally again. They sat outside beneath weak afternoon sunlight while traffic moved slowly beyond the riverfront. Noah stirred iced tea quietly before speaking. Mom moved out of the house. Treyson looked up. Where'd she go? With her sister in Cincinnati. And Madeline. Noah exhaled slowly. Temporary condo downtown. Treyson nodded once. No celebration, no smugness, just acknowledgement. Noah leaned back in the chair. She keeps saying everyone abandoned her. Treyson looked toward the river. People usually say that after consequences arrive. Noah studied him carefully. You really don't hate her? Treyson considered the question honestly. Then I think she hated who she became long before I did. Noah sat silently after that. Wind moved softly across the patio umbrellas overhead. Finally, Noah spoke again. I owe you an apology. You don't. Yes, I do. Treyson looked back toward him. Noah's eyes carried something unfamiliar now. Humility. I watched people underestimate you for years, Noah admitted quietly. including me. Treyson shrugged faintly. Happens. No. Noah shook his head. Not like this. Another silence settled between them. Then Noah laughed once under his breath. You know the weird part? What you never once tried to destroy her. Treyson thought about the question carefully. He could have. Publicly, emotionally, the evidence existed, the recordings, the messages, the affair, the money. But destruction required obsession, and Treyson no longer wanted to build his life around someone else's collapse. She handled most of it herself, he said finally. Noah stared at him for a second, then slowly nodded. That answer sounded exactly like Treyson. Later that evening, Treyson returned to the apartment and found a final certified envelope waiting near the mailbox cluster downstairs. From Madeline, not lawyers this time, personal handwriting. Treyson carried it upstairs but didn't open it immediately. Instead, he changed clothes, microwaved leftover pasta, and sat quietly near the balcony window while evening rain rolled over Dublin. Only then did he unfold the letter. The handwriting looked less controlled than before. No accusations, no strategy, just regret trying to sound dignified. She wrote about pressure, fear, feeling trapped, feeling invisible, feeling ashamed after Noah testified. At the very bottom sat one final sentence. I don't think you ever really understood how much everyone depended on you. Treyson stared at that line the longest, because it accidentally contained the only honest thing Madeline had said in months. Dependable people often became invisible precisely because they carried everything quietly. Treyson folded the letter carefully afterward. Not sentimental, not angry. Then he placed it into the same storage box containing the screenshots, court records, bank transfers, and donor paperwork. Evidence, history, finished things. Outside the balcony window, rain slowed gradually across the parking lot below. For the first time in months, Treyson realized something important. The noise was finally ending. By late October, the trees around Dublin, Ohio, had turned copper and dark red. Cold wind moved steadily across quiet neighborhoods, while leaves collected along sidewalks and drainage curbs after rainstorms. Treyson Long liked mornings there, especially early ones. No traffic yet, no phone calls, no court documents waiting in email inboxes. Just silence and coffee. The rental apartment was gone now. 3 months after the divorce finalized, Treyson bought a small one-story house near the edge of town. Nothing expensive, nothing impressive from the outside. But it was quiet. That mattered more. The garage became his favorite part almost immediately. Half workshop, half storage space. Old tool cabinets lined one wall, beside fishing gear, and neatly labeled plastic containers. Everything organized. Everything repairable. Some evenings, after work, Treyson stood there alone replacing hinges or rebuilding shelves just to keep his hands moving. Routine steadied people. At Riverside Methodist Hospital, life had slowly returned to normal too, or at least a new version of normal. The whispers faded first, then the curiosity, then the pity. Hospital staff eventually moved on because hospitals always moved on. New emergencies arrived every day. New surgeries, new losses, new recoveries. But something subtle had changed in how people looked at Treyson now. Not sympathy, respect. Nurses still waved when he crossed departments carrying diagnostic kits. Surgeons still called him when imaging systems malfunctioned during procedures. Only now there was quieter understanding beneath it all. People knew what he endured. More importantly, they knew how he handled it. No public meltdown, no revenge campaign, no interviews, just facts. That mattered in places built around crisis. One Friday afternoon, Treyson finished recalibrating an ICU monitoring system when Carla, the same nurse from recovery months earlier, leaned against the doorway beside him. "You ever sleep?" "Occasionally," she smirked. "That's progress." Treyson packed tools carefully into the case. Carla hesitated briefly before speaking again. "Noah came by earlier." Treyson looked up. "Everything okay?" He volunteered downstairs in oncology. That made Treyson pause. Volunteered. Started doing patient support visits twice a week. Treyson nodded slowly. That sounded like Noah. Near-death experiences rearranged people differently. Some became bitter. Some disappeared inward. Noah became more honest. Later that evening, Treyson found Noah sitting on the back steps of the house holding 2 coffees and wearing a Browns hoodie beneath a heavy jacket. "You still leave your doors unlocked," Noah said. "Small town. Still dumb." Treyson sat beside him carefully. The donor pain had mostly faded by now, though cold weather still stiffened his lower back some mornings. Noah handed over a coffee. Steam rose into the autumn air. "You look healthier," Treyson said. "So do you." That part was true. The exhaustion around Treyson's eyes had softened over recent months. Weight returned slowly. Sleep came easier. Peace rebuilt people quietly. Noah stared out toward the dark neighborhood street. "I talked to Mom today." Treyson waited. "She's trying therapy." "That good?" "Probably." Noah rubbed both hands around the coffee cup. "And Madeline emailed me again." Treyson stayed silent. "She moved to Nashville." That surprised him slightly. Why? Ashcroft let her go officially. No anger accompanied the statement anymore. Just consequence. Noah looked sideways toward Treyson. She asked, "If you're seeing anyone?" Treyson almost laughed quietly. "No." "You should." "Why?" "Because you spent years taking care of everybody else." Treyson looked out across the dark street. Porch lights glowed softly through trees, while distant traffic hummed beyond the subdivision. Maybe Noah was right. Maybe not. Right now, Treyson mostly enjoyed the absence of chaos. That alone felt valuable. The next morning, Treyson woke before sunrise, like usual. Coffee brewed while cold October rain tapped lightly against kitchen windows. He stood near the counter wearing gray sweatpants and an old Riverside hoodie while reading maintenance schedules on his tablet. Simple life. Predictable life. Good life. Then he noticed the envelope tucked beneath the front door. No postage. Hand-delivered. Treyson already knew the handwriting before opening it. Madeline. The letter inside was shorter this time. No explanations, no dances, no attempts at rewriting history, only honesty stripped down by consequence. I kept thinking, being admired mattered more than being trusted. I understand now what that cost. There was more beneath it. Apologies about Noah, about the fundraiser, about the lies, about the surgery timing. But Treyson noticed something important. The letter no longer asked for anything. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, not sympathy. Maybe reality had finally reached her too. Treyson folded the paper carefully and placed it on the kitchen counter beside his coffee. Outside, rain continued falling softly across the neighborhood. For a long time, he simply stood there, listening to it. Then his phone buzzed. Text from Noah. "Breakfast. My treat this time. Treyson smiled faintly. First genuine smile in months. 20 minutes later, he drove through light rain toward a small diner off Riverside Drive. The waitress already knew Noah's order by heart now. Recovery created routines. Noah looked stronger again, healthier, alive in ways deeper than survival. As they ate, Noah suddenly asked, "You ever regret donating?" Treyson looked up from his coffee. No. Even after everything, Treyson thought about the question honestly. About surgery lights, hospital hallways, empty closets, courtrooms, betrayal, months of lies. Then he looked toward the diner windows where rainwater rolled slowly down the glass. "Noah," he said quietly, "what happened after doesn't change what needed to happen before." Noah sat silently after that, because there wasn't really anything to argue against. Some people only understood value after losing it. Others understood it from the beginning and acted anyway. That was the difference. When breakfast ended, Treyson stepped outside into cold autumn air while clouds slowly broke apart above Columbus. Sunlight pushed through for the first time all morning. Weak, quiet, enough. Treyson stood there a moment beside the Ford Escape, coffee warmth still lingering in his hands. No reporters waited nearby. No lawyers. No accusations. Just traffic moving normally through of another ordinary day. And for the first time since the night he saw that message on Madeline's iPad, Treyson realized something fully. He was no longer surviving the story. He was already past it. Life has a strange way of revealing people under pressure. Some become louder, some become cruel, and some stay calm long enough for the truth to reveal itself without force. Treyson never won because he shouted harder. He won because he stayed steady while everyone else lost control. Quiet people are often underestimated because they don't advertise their value. But when real crisis arrives, they are usually the ones carrying the weight nobody else notices. A lot of people watching this probably know what it feels like to be used, dismissed, or blamed while still trying to do the right thing. Maybe you helped someone who later hurt you. Maybe you stayed calm while others rewrote the story around you. That kind of pain stays with people for a long time. But so does dignity. And dignity lasts longer than performance. If you were in Treyson's position, would you have reacted differently? Let me know in the comments. And if you're watching from outside the US, comment your country and local time too. Subscribe to the channel if you enjoy stories where truth wins slowly but completely. Tomorrow's story might be the heaviest one yet.